What's up, Reaction Gang? Welcome back to the channel. Up next, we got ThomasSowell. You know what time it is. Let's get it.
This presentation, we will bring to you the stand of one of the founding fathers of the United States, George Washington, as regard to slavery. This extract is gotten from the book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Dr. Thomas Sowell. George Washington was one of those who had inherited slaves, and, dying childless, freed his slaves in his will, effective on the death of his wife. His will also provide that slaves too old or too beset with bodily infirmities, not able to take care of themselves, should be taken care of by his estate, and that the children were to be taught to read in his estate. In fact, he continued to pay for the support of some freed slaves, for decades after his death, in accordance with his will. And the tone, as well as the length of it, showed his concerns. The Emancipation Clause stands out from the rest of Washington's will, in the unique forcefulness of its language.
Wow, so in the death of his wife, he chose to free slave, even had them in his will if they were too old. And his estate would take care of them, and the kids would be learning to read, and writing, etc. And it's weird because I can't remember learning about George Washington in regarding of slavery and stuff like that. For some reason, well, we all know George Washington, the first president of the United States. It's like so many things, and this is so. I think it's so great about technology on far we can that you know you can actually learn this stuff online because I can't remember unless I missed a day in class or something like that. I can't remember actually learn about. It was always like a rumor of him with slaves, but we didn't actually learn it in like in a slang in the classroom and learned about it. Like I never gotten that education side of it unless I missed it. I don't want to say I never. My teacher never said it. Or I just saying that maybe I missed it in class that they were teaching about it. But as far as I know, I have never ever learned about him having slave the actual facts of it. So I guess here's the facts itself.
Elsewhere in it, Washington used the standard legal expressions, I give and bequeath, it is my will and direction. In one instance he politely wrote, by way of advice, I recommend to my executors. But the Emancipation Clause rings with the voice of command. It has the iron firmness of a field order. I do hereby expressly forbid the sale of any slave I may die possessed of, under any pretext whatsoever. Long before reaching this point in his personal life, George Washington had said of slavery as a national issue, there is not a man living who wishes more sincerely than I do to see a plan adopted for the abolition of it. But, like Burke, he saw a need for a plan of some sort, rather than simply freeing millions of slaves in a newly emerging nation surrounded by threatening powers, just as the freed slaves
Wow.
themselves would be surrounded by a hostile population. In short, the moral principle was easy, but
Whoa.
figuring out how to apply it in practice was not. Moreover, in a country with an elected government, how the white population at large felt could not be ignored. When Washington congratulated Lafayette for the latter's purchase of a plantation where former slaves could live, he added, would to God a like spirit would diffuse itself generally into the minds of the people of this country, but I despair of seeing it. He saw legislation as the only way to end slavery and said that a legislator who did that would get his vote. Slaves that Washington took north with him after completing his terms as president, in effect freeing them, on the sly, as one biographer put it, at a time when to free them officially could have set off controversies. George Washington was, after all, trying to hold together a fragile coalition of states bearing little resemblance to the world power that the United States would become in later centuries. As a slave owner in Virginia, Washington thought of ways he might sublet much of his estate, in which his current slaves might be hired by the year, as laborers by tenant farmers. He was clearly casting about for some way, as he put it in a letter, to liberate a certain species of property which I possess very repugnantly to my own feelings. But there were no takers. Washington's behavior as a slave owner is also worth noting. Beginning in the early 1770s, he rarely bought a slave and he would not sell one, unless the slave consented, which never happened. Not selling
So wait, what did he just say?
slave and he would not sell one, unless the slave consented. 1770s, he rarely bought a slave and he would not sell one, unless the slave consented, which never.
Oh, Swin bought a slave before he was able to sell one. I pretty much he was trying to get the consent from the slave, but will not. I'm a little confused on that part So the slave didn't want to be sold to like another owner. I think that's what he's saying.
1970s, he rarely bought a slave and he would not sell one, unless the slave consented, which never happened. Not selling slaves was an economic loss. Slave labor on a plantation with soil as poor as Mount Vernon brought in little or nothing. The only profit a man in his position would make was by selling slaves to states where agriculture was more flourishing. Washington would not. I am principled against selling Negroes as you would do cattle at a market. From 1775 until his death, the slave population at Mount Vernon more than doubled. Even a sympathetic biography of George Washington, for example, said, he had helped to create a new world but had allowed into it an infection that he feared would eventually destroy it. This statement is breathtaking in its assumption.
I gotta make sure I get everything.
Washington, for example, said, he had helped to create a new world but had
helped create a new world.
Had allowed into it an infection that he
that allowed an infection that he feared might destroy it. Is he talking about the uprising of the slaves? Give me you guys think about that in the comments. I'm not sure about what he actually meant by that, but I'm thinking that's what he meant by he allowed in an infection. I'm thinking the uprise of the slaves by showing them sincerity and stuff like that. I'm not sure. You guys give me your take about that in the comments.
Feared would eventually destroy it. This statement is breathtaking in its assumptions. That he feared would eventually destroy it. Even to have made slavery a public issue at the time would have accomplished nothing except to jeopardize the survival of a fragile coalition of newly independent states. Yet this man who contributed more than anyone else to the introduction of free republican government in the modern world is widely seen as being under a moral cloud, as if he had chosen to introduce or abet slavery. Washington's actual behavior illustrated what Adam Smith had said decades earlier, in his theory of moral sentiments, that a man prompted by humanity and benevolence, when he cannot establish the right, will not disdain to ameliorate the wrong.
Yeah, go back to what he just said.
Had said decades earlier, in his theory, Washington's under a moral cloud. Introduction of free republican government in the modern world is widely seen as being under a moral cloud, as if he had chosen to introduce or abet slavery. Washington's actual behavior illustrated what Adam Smith had said decades earlier, in his theory of moral sentiments, that a man prompted by humanity and benevolence, when he cannot establish the right, will not disdain to ameliorate the wrong.
Well, wow, that was interesting right there. So it seems like something with his wife, after when he said his wife passed away, apparently that looked like it sparked something inside of him. Like almost like a reality check. Because soon as he said that, that's when he started showing some type of what do you call it again? Sincerity towards the slaves himself. Because you see, he said he wanted to give. I was asking them for their consent before he was able to like sell them. Like he didn't want to forcefully sell the slaves, and he even had them in the will, saying that they was too old, that his estate would take care of them. The kids would be taken care of and learn how to read and write. Cause back then the kids wasn't being teach how to read and write. Cause once they got an education, you know how it goes. Eventually, they will be smart enough to be pretty much be a problem. So they want to keep them dumbfounded, stupid, pretty much like what rap music doing to a lot of these kids these days. You guys see it's everywhere on the news. It's like ridiculous at this point. But give me you guys think about this in the comments. I think it's very interesting because like something sparked inside of John Washington after his wife died. I think it was like a reality check. I don't know. You guys give me you guys think about this in the comments. Like I said, I never heard about this side. It was always rumors about him owning slaves, but I never learned about the in-depths of him owning the slaves. So give me you guys think about this in the comments. And until then, I'll see you guys next video, man. Peace out. Have a blessed day.